Welcome, everybody. We're doing a new episode of Indie Reads Aloud. This has got to be one of my most anticipated interviews because I love this author so much. This is Heather Ashley, and she writes really great stories about amazing worlds and dragons and so much great stuff. So I'm really, really excited to have you on the program, Heather. Thanks for coming
Thank
by.
you. Thanks for having me. I'm
I'm
excited.
so excited. Book one is out. Book two will be out within a month, maybe less. And you're
Yes.
already writing book three.
Oh yeah, well into book three.
I'm so excited. So just so that people kind of get an idea of who you are, how did your writing journey start? Usually I read a bio for everybody, but
Yeah.
that after reading your work and spending time with you at festivals, that seems kind of redundant. So just give everybody an idea of how your writing journey began.
I've been writing the most memorable stuff in my brain since like sixth grade. I got the bug during some creative writing project that we had to do for class. And it just I couldn't finish it. I couldn't figure out where the story was going. I couldn't figure out a plot. It just poured out of me, and I thought I was a pantser. And I loved every minute of it until I realized I had nowhere to go with the story. And that stuck with me, but it also motivated me for years to come as I started to pants more and more things and go nowhere with them.
Yeah.
Which I know is like you're not
Uh,
exactly your catnip, not a pantser over
Catnip.
there.
Yes, right.
But it eventually taught me exactly the balance between pantsing and plotting that I needed to be successful. And as I came up with the idea for the Realm Writers series, the ideas poured out of me so quickly I could create an outline and then allow the pantsing and the characters to carry it and adjust it as I went. And it just kind of poured out of me for 10 years until I finally got to a place where I realized I could start work toward publication.
Yeah. I'm absolutely a devoted, passionate plotter.
Yeah, I
I
know you are.
love my outlines. They're
I know,
great.
I do too.
But it's interesting that you talk about it that way because I see my job as being a hole filler, right? Drake writes the outlines and he makes
Yep,
sure everything is congruent, and I just fill in the missing pieces.
right.
So I don't know if that technically makes me a planter. I'm hoping not, but I don't
You're
know.
hoping not, like it's
I'm
some evil word.
I know it's terrible.
Now,
um
my characters will surprise me and they'll throw my outline out the window or any ideas that I thought I had about where we were going with this. And they'll just be like, actually, no, we're doing this over here. And I'm like, okay, then I'll just rewrite this outline and we'll see if you stick to it.
we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see what
Yeah,
happens.
I had the main character of a series that I'm working on abdicate at one
You
point.
told me this. This is
Yeah,
fascinating. I can't
because
imagine my main characters abdicating.
yeah, she just stood up and said, "No, I'm going to New Zealand. Figure it out on your own." So somebody else had to take over.
Oh my
It
gosh.
was a very
What a twist for the
strange,
reader.
what a twist for the writer,
Well, yeah.
because I didn't know what to do with that. So yeah. Um, so the series is the Realm Riders, and
Yes,
book one is an Heir of Realms.
correct.
Heir.
Yes.
Check out the show notes. You can see a cover. You can see all the things in the show notes. But talk to me a little bit about the overarching plot direction for this story. This has dragons, and this has time portaling, and
Yes.
this has a flavor of gambling to it, and this
Yes.
has lots of really interesting people who walk very fuzzy lines of distinction.
Yes.
So there's a lot going on with this series. So
Yeah.
how do you initially, like, if you had to describe the umbrella of
Yeah.
this series, how would you talk about that?
It took me a hot minute to figure out my elevator pitch, I'm not going to lie, but it sort of came to me in a moment of inspiration when someone was telling me it has to be two sentences long, which for a book of my size, even just Air alone,
That's
not the whole series, is the most daunting thing I had ever heard in
yeah,
the
yeah,
history of ever.
because just for fun, just to give people context,
My
um,
1.5 pound fly
Heir,
swatter
yeah,
of a novel.
Heir of
Yes.
Realms is like 460 pages. So, um,
And it was split in half. I
mm,
actually wrote almost all of I wrote all of book one and what ended up being half of book two in one go. I realized I had a break and put.
so
So be-
what was the elevator pitch that you were able to pull out
yes.
of
So
that?
the elevator pitch I came up with, which has recently been tweaked a little bit to give people a better idea of what's going on, is it's a tale of two young heroines, a dragon rider and a portal jumper, who are trying to save their realms from extinction by fighting off dragon-like parasites.
Dragon-like parasites.
Yeah.
I don't want to give away too much, but can you just give us a flavor of what that kind of character is?
Yeah, and the reason that I changed the pitch a little bit to include a dragon rider and a portal jumper is because I wanted there to be a very stark contrast between dragon riders and dragon parasites, because I don't want people to think that dragons are villainized in these books,
And they're
because
not, and they're
they're
so
not.
not.
They
Yeah.
have a whole flavor of character traits and quirks, and they are as human as we are in many ways, but better because they're dragons. But the dragon-like parasites, if you think of dropping ink into water and watching it swirl, or when you blow out a candle and you get that nebulous sort of a crinkling DNA feel to it,
Yeah.
that is sort of how the Narxon come into a realm through a tear in the realm's fabric, in this, hopefully in the sky, so that they have time to be burned off before they hit the ground and turn everything to ash.
I'm so glad that my imagination is seeing what you're writing in the
I'm
proper
glad.
form. I mean, that's really cool. That I'm able to take over your imagination and just jump into your head that way.
Oh, I'm
That
so glad.
that is by far the best part of your writing, is that it is so very tangible and so easy to connect with.
Thank you.
It's very, very cool. So I could talk to you for hours about your writing and your
We
style
have.
and all, and we have. But this program, I really want to focus on giving our listeners an opportunity to hear some of this magic that you
That'd be
weave.
great.
So I would absolutely love it if you could read for me.
I would love it too. So let me just take a sip of tea because I'm getting over some
Absolutely.
laryngitis.
Yeah, I understand. I have similar issues talking too much. Um, but I'm so excited about your work because it absolutely, just one more thing before we start the read.
Please.
When I first read you, I thought you studied under Anne McCaffrey.
She is a huge inspiration for this series.
So
Absolutely.
anybody who enjoys Anne McCaffrey, you will love
Yep.
Remreliers.
Yep. I
Absolutely.
grew up on her. So of course she's going to be a big portion
Yeah,
of
yeah,
what
yeah.
happens in my brain. She's fabulous.
Yeah, it's amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
So, but I love that your stories are on par with her,
Thank
and
you.
that I mean I definitely see the two of you as contemporaries.
Thank you. I
Yeah,
appreciate that. That's big
very
because
cool.
she
That's
is the
very
queen.
cool. She is. She
She
is
is.
Dragon Rider Queen. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so when you're ready, please take the microphone and read
Great.
aloud.
Thank you so much. This excerpt is from chapter one in the exchange. Armed with her free drink, she stepped away from the bar to make room for the next patron. His frilly white cuffs peeked out from the sleeves of his well-tailored jacket, and a tall white wig towered over his head like one of the great composers of the 1700s. As she passed him, though, a flash of light caught his pants. They shined like patent leather. The outer seams were lined with grommets that stretched the full length of his legs, displaying little circles of flesh all the way down his boots. She didn't remember seeing those on the actor playing Mozart. Emmeline remembered what the woman behind the desk had told her about Laurel. Maid's outfit. Yes, but from what century? She wondered as she looked around. Or are we talking French maid? It wouldn't surprise her after seeing Amadeus' pants. She continued through the club, discreetly scoping out the crowd. She might not have been a regular club goer. Others' experiences had told her the wrong eye contact was a sure way to invite a fight. The clientele here didn't seem remotely agitated, though. Why should they be if they're drinking for free? She glanced toward the seating area. and walked headlong into the chest of another leather jacketed man. She ricocheted off him into a circle of chairs and couches where her hip bumped the shoulder of a man holding a rocks glass. He jumped to his feet and hollered at her in an unrecognizable language as he struggled to right the glass before more of its contents could spill over his rust colored sharkskin pants. Sorry, sorry, she yelped to both the man hurling foreign insults and the black jacketed one glaring at her. She stepped away from them, glancing around herself to avoid bumping into anything else, and noticed a woman waving at her from the next chair circle over. Emmeline rushed toward her as both men ignored her apologies and returned to their business. It's okay, sweetie, the woman called to her in a high pitched Jersey accent. She looked like a burlesque dancer from the 50s. Her short brown hair was styled in finger waves, and she was smacking her gum. A pink bubble grew from her rounded lips before she popped it with her teeth. Accidents happen. Anyway, the ones in the jackets always look miserable. You get used to it. Who are they? Emmeline called back. She moved in closer and pulled out one of her earplugs to better hear the response. It was a painful sacrifice. You're new, a guy on the other end of the couch announced. Thick black liner ringed his eyes, and his spiky black hair ended in frosted blue tips. Obviously, she's new, the burlesque dancer snapped at him. She must have been in her mid-30s from the look of her, and there was a lot to look at in that tiny sequin dress. I'm Bernadette, she called. Oh, of course you are. Emmeline, she called back, wondering if she could have been using a false name all this time. Too late. Waste time, huh? Bernadette asked. Emmeline nodded. I guess. I just ended up here. I'm trying to get out. Bernadette's eyes moved to her stamped wrist. You won't be here long, hun, she noted. Who you looking for? Someone named Laurel? Emmeline replied, glancing around the group. No one wore anything remotely resembling a maid's outfit. Bernadette looked thoughtful, or at least that was how Emmeline interpreted the expression. Her eyebrows sort of crinkled and her mouth fell slightly ajar, the combination reminiscent of a confused fish. She shrugged. I don't know her. She looked around the group inquisitively, but everyone shook their heads. For whom are we looking? A man with a hint of an accent called from behind Emmeline. He had 4 drinks in mismatched glasses balanced between his fingers. How he carried that many was a mystery to Emmeline. She stepped aside so he could pass them out and tried not to let her jaw drop. He is gorgeous. He had that thick, perfectly feathered brown hair from the 70s that could be brushed back in place, if it ever moved, with a quick finger comb. It was the kind of look that made women of her mother's generation both jealous and terribly excited. His strong jaw and bright green eyes didn't hurt either, but he wasn't in bell bottoms. He wore a fitted tan sports jacket over a white button down shirt and dark jeans. Emmeline guessed he was edging on 40, but in this lighting it was hard to tell. She smiled at the hearty approval her mother would extend if she brought him home. Of course, there was no chance of that. He was definitely out of her league and very probably gay. All the best looking ones were. Someone named Laurel, the goth guy on the couch yelled, glowering. New one for you, Vaughn, Bernadette hollered to the handsome newcomer with a wink in Emmeline's direction. The waiting woman in Darnell? Vaughn asked. He sounded vaguely French, but it was hard to tell over the music. Emmeline shrugged. If by waiting woman you mean maid? Very possibly, she yelled in his ear. He smelled wonderful, which seemed like a feat in this place. Vaughn assessed her before flashing her a knowing smile. You got Janelle. The others made a revelatory ah sound. I'm sorry? Emmeline asked. Janelle, Vaughn repeated, somehow boosting his volume. At the front desk. Cold like something from the depths of the sea, but with an even saltier disposition? Emmeline nodded. He flashed her a broad smile, and his straight white teeth gleamed between his perfect lips. Yeah, she's not exactly what anyone would call forthcoming. Don't worry, you'll figure it out. He handed off the last drink to the middle-aged ranch hand in the overstuffed armchair. Hold this, will you, Randy? The glass was filled with 2 fingers of a rich brown liquid Emmeline guessed was bourbon. Randy sniffed the bouquet with relish and grinned up at his benefactor. No promises it'll be here when you get back, he drawled. Vaughn patted Randy's shoulder. I know Laurel, he yelled in Emmeline's ear. I can take you to her. She's over there. He thumbed a spot over his shoulder, farther within the club. Thank you. Can you also help me get out of here so I can go home? Emmeline asked. He smiled and took her hand to guide her through the crowd. He scanned the room, peering over the heads and shoulders crowded in around them. Lorel is right over there, he said in her ear, and cut a path through a group of people chatting, or rather yelling, at one another over the pounding techno. He brought Emmeline up to another occupied ring of mismatched furniture. No one wore a maid's outfit. Well, she was. Who you looking for, Vaughn? Asked a man with the accent of a mobster and the pinstripe suit to match. Laurel, Vaughn called back. I'm right here, came an accented voice from behind them. A petite, curvaceous woman approached with a drink in each hand. Her delicate features were offset by her large brown eyes, which popped against her light brown skin. Her black hair was confined in a long, thick braid that snaked down over her shoulder, and she was clad in the gray maid's outfit Janelle had promised. Laurel passed a glass off to a beautiful woman with dark skin, close cropped hair, and a brightly colored muumuu before giving them her attention. What is it, Vaughn? Vaughn turned to his charge and dropped his arm from her back. This is Emmeline Darrow. She offered her hand to Laurel. Laurel, Laurel grasped the inside of Emmeline's arm near the elbow and held on for a moment, their forearms touching along their lengths. It was not the handshake Emmeline had expected, and she barely had time to grasp the woman's elbow in return before the maid pulled away. Laurel seemed to recognize Emmeline's foreign reaction to the greeting and gave her a weak smile. You're my new transfer? Her R's had a slight roll to them, like her first tongue could be one of the Romance languages. I have no idea, Emmeline replied. She slipped the transitor from her purse and placed it into Laurel's hand. But I think I'm supposed to give you this. Thank you, Laurel yelled. No trouble finding me? None, thanks to Vaughn here, Emmeline called back. But as she turned to gesture to him, she realized he was gone. Laurel smiled. He's a good guy. Where did he go? Emmeline asked. I didn't get to thank him. He's a runner like I am, Laurel replied, as if that explained everything. She tipped up her glass and downed her drink in one long gulp. Emmeline noticed a peculiar pendant gleaming at the end of her necklace. The handle of a metal skeleton key ended in a thin cylinder with several perpendicular rays emanating from it where the bit should have been. The short rays pushed the pendant away from her flesh, and it hung awkwardly below her collarbone. Something about it felt oddly familiar. Laurel set her glass on the table in the middle of their seating area and waved at the group. He probably had to go, as I do now. Nice to meet you, she yelled and moved toward the back of the club. How much more of this place is there? Wait, Emmeline called and jogged to catch up with her. Wait, what do I do now? How do I get out of here? Laurel had disconnected the key from a clasp on her necklace and was fitting it into the hole with the squiggly offshoots that Janelle had put in the back of the transitor. That's why it felt familiar. When Laurel turned the key, one of the ends of the baton popped open and she fished out a rolled up piece of paper with one finger. I have to go, Laurel insisted, tucking the paper into the front pocket of her calf length dress. She turned to a hip high receptacle that stood against a nearby wall and slipped the transitor into a square slot on the top. It disappeared from view. I'll see you next time. Thanks again. Next time, Emmeline called back, but Laurel had already stepped up to a knobless door ahead of them and fitted the key into a barely visible sun-shaped hole. The word Darnell materialized on the door. She turned the key and the wood disappeared, replaced by a black void. Laurel walked into it as she replaced the key on her chain. She too disappeared, and the door rematerialized behind her. Whoa, Emmeline breathed. She stepped forward and placed her palm against the door. It was unyielding. Her fingers groped around until they brushed the small, sun-shaped indentation that Laurel's key had fit into. What the hell is this? She wondered aloud. It ain't hell, honey, a familiar voice called from beside her. Emmeline looked over to see Bernadette eyeing her with motherly concern. Burlesque dancer smiled. It's the exchange. So I've got one more, right? Let me take
Okay.
a sip.
This is so much fun.
Okay, so this is from chapter 15. And my name is Maven, she said, her voice deeper than Rosalind had expected. I will be training you today, and this is Rusalka, Dar Elmina's dragon. Upon hearing her name, the tawny cooed and bobbed her head. Over the next few days, you will be taught protocol for interacting with dragons, including kenneling and unkenneling them. Once you can do both, you will be able to pass to the next step, flight preparation. Some of you, graduation to flight preparation will take place sooner than later. Lesson progression here is based on mastery. You move ahead only when you're ready. What is there to master? A knot faced student, his features all squished up in the center of his head, stepped forward. Practiced defiance radiated from his pinched features as he pointed at Rosewin and Rusalka. Looks like these dragons are about as tame as puppies. Maven winced. They do not like being compared to dogs. Why not? The young man persisted. Can't conscience the idea that they're at our disposal as much as our farm animals are? He turned around to laugh with his friends. Rusalka looked up from Rosewin, and her eyes were alight. She took in a short breath, and her gut rumbled. Rusalka, Maven admonished, but she was too late. The tawny let out a short burst of flame across the crown of the knot-faced student's head. He yelped and scurried behind his friends to use them like a shield. When he finally peeked up over their shoulders, he revealed a bald stripe along the top of his head where his hair had been incinerated. Ludicrous tufts of singed red hair stuck out wildly on either side of the gap. A little giggle leapt from Rosewin's throat before she could stop herself, and the whole group fell into hysterics. Even Rusalka rumbled with what seemed like laughter. Rosewin patted her nose. The knot-faced boy glowered at them. Precisely the implication they seek to avoid, Maven said dryly. She made no move to inspect the student for damages. If I had my kennel bet, a word Rosalind recognized as a bet on how long it would take a trainee to unkennel a dragon, I would give you 2.5 weeks. 2.5? A trainer from Thane's group called out. He's already been at it half a year. Trainees around her hooted, and her red dragon lifted her head to Rusalka conspiratorially. The tawny chortled back. Maven smiled and waved her colleague off. So if there are no more questions or comments, let us begin with anatomy. Rosewin was more than familiar with the parts of a dragon, so she spent most of the lesson sneaking peeks at the other groups scattered about the arena. Everyone seemed to be at the same point in the lecture until Thane's group escorted their red toward her stall. He waved at Rosewin in passing. Lady Stanber? Snapped to attention, Rosewin cast a sheepish glance around herself. Between her lack of focus and the use of her title, her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. Please call me Rosewin Darmaven. A couple trainees whispered among themselves, but most of the group remained silent. She hoped her status, let alone her connection to the royal family, would not create animosity. We will begin with kenneling. Rosewin, come stand before Rusalka with your arms at your sides, Maven instructed. Good. Now, to kennel her, you must gain Rusalka's permission to escort her back into her stall. Once you are tethered to a dragon, these kinds of permissions can be readily asked and granted through a mental tie you will share called nexing. But for dragons you are not tethered to, you must use physical gestures to respectfully convey your wishes. Rusalka is a good-natured beast, and she is clearly fond of you, so she should not be difficult to persuade. But if a dragon were in a more challenging mood, a deeper bow of your head rather than a slight incline could make all the difference. For you, Rosewin, a nod should do. Rosewin inclined her head toward the dragon, who dipped her own head in response. Then Rusalka passed an amused puff of air through her nose. Rosewin giggled. Good, said Maven. She instructed Rosewin to maintain eye contact with Rusalka and nod toward the stables. Rusalka dipped her head again, and the pair began walking, waddling, in Rosewin's case, in the direction of her stall. Rosewin felt silly playing charades with a dragon. Her parents had no need to do this with their beasts and had not taught their children to do it, likely because they were nexing in the background when their children rode them. Trainees must play charades, as you call it, a voice said in Rosewin's mind. Your parents do it with each other's dragons as well. You just never noticed. Rosewin shot a glance at Maven and then at the rest of the group, none of whom seemed to have spoken or even heard the comment. Finally, Rosewin's eyes traveled to Rusalka. The dragon winked. Rosewin gave her head a shake. She could not have heard that. Of course you heard that. Rusalka nodded encouragingly at her. But I should not have, Rosewin replied mentally. She was nexing. Her parents nexed with their own dragons, but they were tethered to them. She should not be nexing with a dragon to whom she was not tethered, let alone one who was tethered to someone else. Somehow more startling, though. Nexing felt completely natural, even untethered. How am I doing this? Rusalka blew air through her nose, but did not respond. When they reached her stall, Rosewind pulled the door wide, and Maven directed her to gesture toward the opening with a sweep of her arm. As Rosewind stepped back in front of Rusalka, she hesitated, her arm still at her side. Would you care to enter? She next instead. Yes, but you had best do as Maven said. Rosewind frowned. But you just said you would be happy to go in. But no one else knows that, and this may be a gift you want to keep to yourself for a while. Rosewind held out her arm toward the stall. After you, she next. Rusalka ambled inside, amusement shining in her eyes. Brittany turned to face around to face the group and gave a little bow as everyone applauded. Excellent, Maven cheered before beginning the process of unkindling Rusalka for the next student. Who will be next? As hands shot up to volunteer, Rusalka next to Rosewind again. It looks as though you have not gone completely unnoticed. Rosewind glanced around and felt her heart skip a beat as her eyes met Darbevel's. His head spun back around toward his group. Realm it, Rosewind thought to herself. Rusalka snorted in reply. That's
I
it.
I love it when you read about dragons. I get all goosebumpy and happy, and it's so cool.
You.
So what's the hardest part about keeping the portaling world and the dragon worlds separate?
Probably all the rules. I've established like a long list of rules in the world building of both of these places and making sure that I've tapped all that and also remembered everything I've come up with, either with outlines, notes, or just all up here. Keeping it straight is probably the hardest part.
I would imagine you have many, many really interesting names for your characters, which is part of why I love it when authors read out loud to me, because then I learn how to pronounce names that I
Yeah.
don't necessarily know.
Yeah.
Um, so what made you choose a more complicated naming convention?
So the names in Dardanelle are all based on Old English. So they're either literally an Old English name or they're a take on one that I thought fit better or worked the way I wanted it to. But each realm has its own naming convention. Obviously, Emmeline's realm has pretty normal standard names that we're used to hearing in the US. And Welsamar has very strict naming conventions. Other realms like Chishik's, they have fun naming conventions and spellings as well. So I just kind of tried to create a rule and stay within that world so that things sounded like they were cohesive. And in Welsamar, given that French bend to the accents, I thought
Sure.
everything needed kind of an ah kind of a
Yeah.
sound at the end of it. And so it needs it either in the middle or at the end. And so there are literal naming conventions when it comes to last names in Welsamar as well.
I someday I want to be able to peek at your notes, because I'm
Oh,
just
sure.
fascinated by how you keep all of this together and create such a really delightful story. And
Oh, thank you.
just to let people know before we go, you have 8 books planned for this series?
I'm thinking six, but even though I know where we're going, the path we take to get there is sometimes something my characters only let me in on as we're embarking on another journey. So I think it'll take maybe 6 books. I know I can't get it done in four, but it could end up being 8 if somebody takes me on a joyride I wasn't expecting.
And that's always the fun part of being
I
an
know, it's the
author, right?
best. Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
last thing before we go, for anybody who is watching the program today on YouTube, I just want you to show us your hat in a
Oh,
little
yeah.
bit, because this is such a great little feature of meeting you in person.
Of
We get to meet your
course.
dragon hat.
Yeah, it's a little warm in here to be wearing this today, but I usually have my dragon hat so that when I'm there and I'm writing in my notebook and keeping busy between customers, if you will, then I have the eyes watching the passersby
and
instead.
and I wanted to ask you this since I've met you and I haven't. This is a good opportunity. Does
Okay.
your dragon hat have a name?
You know it doesn't, but it has a personality. So I'm hoping I've got a birthday coming up, and I've been dropping subtle hints to my fiance for a hat box because it hates going in a plastic bag.
I can
It
understand, you can't breathe.
hates it.
Yeah,
Right. It
yeah.
despises it. And so every time I try to get it into one, it fights me. And I'm like, okay, I will get you a hat box. I will make it black. It will match your aesthetic. We'll try to make
Right,
this work
right.
for you. I hope it likes the one I picked out. I really do.
I hope it reveals its name
That would
because
be great too.
that would be
Maybe if
very
I
fun.
put it in a good home, it will. It usually lives in that cabinet, but when it's not in use, but it needs a better way to be carried.
So very cool. It's such a delight to have you on the program, and
Thank you
I
so
love your
much.
stories, and I love your style, and
Thank you.
you're just a fun human on top of
Ah,
all of
so
it.
are
So
you.
thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming on the program, and as soon as
Thanks for
book 2
having me.
comes out, I expect you'll be back, right?
I hope to be. That is my goal.
Awesome. Thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
Heather.
Have a good one.
You too.